Sarah Chen sat at the long metal table in the communal eating area, staring at the empty tray before her. The dispensary machine had clicked and whirred, then displayed the dreaded red symbol that meant her ration credits were exhausted for the cycle. Around her, the other workers from various species picked at their meals, most too tired from the day's labor to notice one human sitting with nothing. The mining colony on Varath 7 was not supposed to be like this. Sarah had signed up for the job thinking it would be an adventure, a chance to see the galaxy and make enough credits to send back home to her younger siblings on Earth. The recruitment officer had smiled warmly and promised fair treatment, good food, and decent quarters. What he hadn't mentioned was that the company would start deducting administrative fees and equipment costs from their pay, leaving barely enough for basic necessities. She had given most of her remaining credits to old Mekthar, the Druvian who worked in the processing plant. His breathing apparatus had malfunctioned, and without immediate repair, he would have suffocated in the thin atmosphere of the facility. Sarah hadn't thought twice. She had simply transferred her credits and helped him to the medical station. That was 3 days ago. Now she was paying the price. The hunger wasn't new. Sarah had skipped meals before back on Earth when money was tight. She knew the hollow feeling in her stomach, the slight dizziness that came with it. She could handle it. What bothered her more was the cold. The heating in her quarters had been reduced due to insufficient credits, and the nights on Varath 7 were brutal. Movement caught her eye. Across the table, 4 young Kethrani were watching her. The Kethrani were a felinoid species, covered in short fur that ranged from golden to deep amber. These 4 were cubs, probably no more than 10 cycles old in their development. They had arrived at the colony 2 weeks ago with their guardian, Thexnor, who worked in the engineering section. The Kethrani rarely brought their young to work colonies, but Thexnor had no choice after his mate had died. Single guardians were not uncommon in the galaxy. Sarah had met the cubs on their first day. They had been frightened, overwhelmed by the noise and the strange species around them. She had knelt down to their level and spoken softly, showing them around the facility, pointing out the safer areas where they could play during rest periods. She had even fashioned small toys for them, from discarded power cell casings, carefully smoothing the edges so they wouldn't hurt themselves. The cubs had followed her around for days, their large eyes watching everything she did. Sarah had taught them simple words in Standard Galactic, laughed at their attempts to mimic her gestures, and listened patiently when they chattered in their own language, even though she understood only fragments. Now those same 4 pairs of eyes were fixed on her empty tray. The smallest cub, Mira, tilted her head in that curious way young Kethrani did. Her brothers, Jax, Kef, and little Tomo, leaned in to whisper to each other. Their ears twitched and flattened in what Sarah had learned was a sign of concern. Sarah forced a smile and gave them a small wave. Everything was fine. She was fine. They were just cubs. They didn't need to worry about adult problems. But the cubs stood up. As one unit, they picked up their trays and moved around the table to where Sarah sat. Without a word, they settled onto the bench beside and across from her. Mira was the first to act. She pushed her tray toward Sarah, nudging it with her small, furred hands. The tray held a portion of protein paste, synthesized vegetables, and a small cube of what looked like sweetened grain. Sarah shook her head. "No, Mira, that's yours. You need to eat." Mira's ears flattened further, and she pushed the tray more insistently. Then Jax slid his tray over as well, dividing his portion between himself and the space in front of Sarah. Kef and Tomo followed, each pushing half their food toward her. "Cubs, no," Sarah said, her voice catching slightly. "You're growing. You need this more than I do." Jax made a soft, chirping sound and pointed at Sarah, then at the food, then mimed eating. The message was clear. Mira reached out with one small paw and patted Sarah's hand. The gesture was so gentle, so full of simple kindness, that Sarah felt her eyes begin to sting. Around them, other workers had begun to notice. A Brenthian paused mid-bite, his mandibles clicking softly. 2 Vardeshi exchanged glances. Even a group of humans from the drilling section looked over, their conversations dying down. Sarah looked at the 4 small faces staring up at her with such determination. They had so little themselves. The colony didn't provide special meals for cubs. They ate the same rations as everyone else. And yet here they were, offering half of what they had to her. "I can't take this," Sarah whispered. Tomo, the smallest, made a distressed sound. His ears went completely flat against his head, and his tail drooped. He looked like he might cry. Mira squeezed Sarah's hand tighter. Sarah understood then. This wasn't about the food. This was about something deeper. She had shown them kindness when they were scared and alone in a strange place. She had given them comfort when they needed it most. Now they saw her in need, and every instinct they had was telling them to help her the way she had helped them. To refuse would be to reject their compassion. It would teach them that kindness wasn't meant to flow both ways, that some beings were worthy of help and others weren't. Sarah couldn't do that to them. Slowly, she reached out and took a small portion from each tray, making sure to leave them with most of their food. "Thank you," she said softly. "Thank you so much." The cubs' ears immediately perked up. Mira made a happy trilling sound. They all began to eat together, the cubs chattering between themselves in their language, occasionally offering Sarah more from their trays, which she politely declined. What Sarah didn't notice was the ripple effect spreading through the dining area. The Brenthian worker stood and walked to the dispensary, purchasing an extra ration with his credits and setting it on the table near Sarah. A Vardeshi did the same. Then one of the human drillers. Then another. By the time the cubs had finished their meal, Sarah's section of the table had accumulated 6 additional rations. Workers passed by, some nodding to her, others touching her shoulder briefly. No one made a big show of it. No one demanded thanks. They simply gave. Thexnor appeared at the entrance to the dining area, coming to collect his cubs. He saw them clustered around Sarah, saw the food on the table, and his eyes widened. Kathrani were proud beings, fiercely protective of their young. For a moment, Sarah worried he might be angry that his cubs had given away their food. Instead, Thexnor approached and placed his large paw on Sarah's shoulder. "You taught them well," he said in his rumbling voice. "They understand now what it means to be strong." Sarah looked up at him, confused. "Strength is not keeping everything for yourself," Thexnor continued. "Strength is giving when you have little. Weakness is having much and giving nothing." He gestured to his cubs. "They will remember this day. They will remember the human who was kind to them. And they will remember that when she needed help, they had the strength to give it." The cubs gathered around Sarah, each hugging her in turn. Mira whispered something in Kathrani. Sarah didn't understand the words, but she understood the meaning. Family. Pack. Together. As they left, Sarah sat surrounded by the gifted rations, feeling the warmth of the dining area, the presence of dozens of beings from a dozen different worlds, all of whom had been moved by the simple act of 4 small cubs sharing their meals. She packaged most of the extra food carefully. Tomorrow, she would make sure old Mekthar got some. She would check on the Javari family in Sector 7 who had just arrived. She would continue to do what she had always done because that was who humans were at their core. They gave when they had little. They shared when they were hungry. They helped when they were tired. And they taught others, without even realizing it, that kindness was not a transaction, but a way of being. The cubs had learned from her. But tonight, Sarah had learned something too. She had learned that the seeds of compassion she had planted had taken root and bloomed in the most beautiful way possible. 4 small cubs, barely more than children, had shown her that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't technology or strength or clever thinking. It was the simple, radical act of caring for one another, even when it cost them everything they had. Sarah picked up one of the ration cubes and took a bite, letting the nutrition spread through her empty stomach. Tomorrow would be hard. The next day would be hard. But tonight, surrounded by the memory of small paws and gentle chirps, she felt rich beyond measure. The galaxy was vast and often cruel. But in moments like this, it was also filled with light.